For decades, NATO's been a cornerstone of Western security, but behind the scenes, a massive imbalance in defense spending festered. Was Europe simply enjoying a free ride on the American dime, and why did this go on for so long? Before we dive into the complex history and future of NATO's defense spending, if you want to stay on top of everything happening in US politics, hit that subscribe button right now and leave a like. It really helps this channel grow. The story of NATO's defense spending imbalance is a long one, stretching back more than 3 decades. For a significant chunk of that time, the United States carried the lion's share of the alliance's military burden. Meanwhile, many European allies consistently spent far less on defense than Washington believed they should. This disparity wasn't a fleeting issue, it endured through the end of the Cold War, spanned multiple US administrations, and survived constant debates about burden sharing. It's only in recent years, spurred by Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine and intensified pressure from former President Donald Trump, that we've seen many NATO members finally begin to significantly increase their defense budgets. But the question remains, why did this gap persist for so long? Defense analysts point to a confluence of factors. Initially, there was a significant dose of post-Cold War optimism. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, the primary threat NATO was designed to deter suddenly vanished. This led many European nations to collect a so-called peace dividend, redirecting military funds towards domestic priorities. Between 1992 and 1999 alone, defense spending among European NATO members dropped by a staggering 22%. This set a pattern of underinvestment that would continue for decades, even as the US maintained troops in Europe and continued to act as the alliance's ultimate security backstop. Adding to this was the deeply ingrained nature of domestic political priorities. As defense spending declined, many European governments expanded or maintained their social welfare systems, think healthcare, pensions, and higher education. These programs became fundamental to domestic politics, often making them far more politically difficult to cut than military budgets. With the US reliably providing the bulk of NATO's military might, there was little immediate pressure on these governments to change course. This created what some defense analysts call a moral hazard problem. Allies could spend less on their own militaries because they assumed the US commitment to NATO was ironclad, meaning they wouldn't face the full security consequences of their decisions. This dynamic became self-reinforcing. As European militaries shrank, many allies grew increasingly dependent on American capabilities, from crucial logistics and intelligence to missile defense, strategic airlift, and the nuclear umbrella. This dependency was acknowledged even by NATO leaders. As NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte noted, the US conventional presence and its nuclear guarantee remained vital for European security. American frustration over this burden-sharing issue is almost as old as NATO itself. As far back as 1953, President Dwight D. Eisenhower warned that the American well can run dry and urged European allies to take on a greater share of the defense burden. This concern resurfaced repeatedly through the decades, with successive administrations seeking greater European contributions. Even after the Cold War, the worry persisted. In a notable 2011 farewell speech, then Secretary of Defense Robert Gates issued a stark warning of a dim if not dismal future for NATO if European governments continued to underinvest. He cautioned that American lawmakers and taxpayers would have dwindling patience for carrying a disproportionate share of the alliance's defense costs. Yet, despite these decades of warnings, the underlying incentives remained largely unchanged. Washington consistently reaffirmed its commitment to NATO and maintained a significant military presence on the continent, which, paradoxically, reduced the pressure on allies to rapidly boost their own defense spending. As former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Europe and NATO, Jim Townsend, observed, every US administration pushed allies to spend more, but the progress was slow. The situation gained renewed urgency after Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014, which led NATO to establish the 2% of GDP defense spending benchmark. While spending gradually increased, progress was uneven. The familiar pattern continued: American officials urged more spending, European leaders promised improvements, and NATO largely continued to rely on US military power. So, what finally broke this cycle? According to Townsend, it was a potent combination of Russia's escalating aggression and Donald Trump's willingness to fundamentally challenge long-held assumptions about the alliance. The 2022 invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and Trump's direct questioning of whether the U.S. should defend allies who weren't meeting their defense spending commitments, served as a wake-up call. Trump argued that NATO members were exploiting American taxpayers and suggested that U.S. protection should not be unconditional. Whether viewed as pressure, a warning, or a negotiation tactic, his approach undeniably altered the post-Cold War assumptions that had shaped the alliance and accelerated a debate that had been simmering for decades. This shift culminated in a significant agreement at NATO's summit in The Hague, where allies committed to a new goal: spending 5% of GDP on defense and defense-related investments by 2035. This represents a dramatic leap from the previous two benchmark and reflects a growing consensus that the alliance faces a much more dangerous security environment than it has in decades. It signals that many allies have finally come to the same conclusion that U.S. presidents have voiced for years: the era of reduced military spending is over. However, analysts caution that increasing budgets is only the first step. Rebuilding military power is a far more complex undertaking. Europe still relies heavily on the U.S. for critical capabilities, from air defense and logistics to intelligence and defense industrial capacity. Translating increased spending into genuine military readiness will take years. Moreover, the challenge extends beyond equipment and spending levels. As John Byrne of Concerned Veterans for America points out, decades of multinational military commands being overwhelmingly led by American officers means many European nations lack the recent, large-scale command experience. Building that institutional knowledge and leadership capacity for running complex coalition operations cannot happen overnight. You can buy equipment, but you can't instantly buy command experience. This brings us to a critical juncture for NATO. After decades of imbalance and warnings, the alliance is finally seeing a surge in defense commitments. But the real test lies ahead: can Europe translate these newfound financial commitments into the tangible military strength needed to truly stand on its own? So, what do you think about this? Has the era of European underinvestment finally ended, or is this just another cycle? Drop your opinion in the comments below. I read every single one.